He kissed me in front of 100 people, then vanished 5 minutes later. No goodbye, no explanation. Just silence. Hi, I'm Grace. On what was supposed to be my engagement night, I was left standing in white heels in disbelief. 3 years later, I'm living on a yacht off the Amalfi Coast, running million-euro deals and sleeping like I've finally exhaled. How did I get from heartbreak in Arizona to peace in Paris? And what happened when I saw him again, this time from across a boardroom table? Tell me, have you ever had to rebuild from nothing? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Tyler kissed my cheek in front of 100 people. His hand rested lightly on my lower back as the jazz trio played something smooth and familiar in the courtyard. White hydrangeas swayed gently beneath the amber string lights, and champagne sparkled in every glass. The March breeze in Scottsdale had cooled slightly after sundown, but my palms were still damp. I'd spent weeks perfecting every detail, the seating chart that separated his opinionated aunt from my sensitive cousin, the signature cocktail menu with his favorite bourbon, the flower arch we'd argued over and then chosen together. My mother whispered earlier that evening, "This looks like something out of a movie." For a moment I believed her. He arrived 20 minutes late, but smiled wide as if time bent to him. "You look unbelievable," he whispered, his eyes sliding briefly past me toward Kendall Ross, who stood at the bar in a pale blue dress that wasn't quite wedding guest appropriate. I forced a breath and let it go. This was my night, our night. I greeted guests, accepted hugs and compliments, and made sure the staff refilled trays of prosciutto crostini. Tyler made the rounds, clinking glasses and telling the story again of how he'd proposed under a red rock formation in Sedona. He left out how I'd almost said no because he'd forgotten to ask my parents first. I reminded myself, don't dwell, not tonight. Kendall drifted toward me with a gift bag all metallic shimmer and pastel tissue. "A little something for the bride-to-be," she said, her voice syrupy. Her nail brushed mine as she handed me the card. Inside, in looping script, it read, "You'll be free soon." I didn't understand it yet. I smiled tightly, tucked the card back in, and placed the bag on the gifts table beside a vase of tulips already beginning to droop. Dinner ended. I touched up my lipstick in the powder room and returned to find Tyler checking his phone beneath the arbor of eucalyptus. He tucked it away fast and smiled like nothing was wrong. "Ready for your speech?" he asked. "I think so," I replied, but my stomach flipped. Something about his tone, it was light but hollow. I tapped my champagne flute. The clink echoed. The trio quieted. Everyone turned. I thanked our guests, toasted our families, and began to read a few lines I'd written about love being a promise, not just a feeling. Tyler shifted beside me, then leaned in. "I've got to take this," he muttered. He walked off phone to his ear. I tried to keep reading, laughter behind me, then a clatter of silverware, murmurs. I shortened the rest of the toast and smiled too long at nothing in particular. My father raised his glass out of sympathy more than celebration. Minutes passed, then 20. Derek and Sean stepped outside to check on the valet. Kendall was gone. The jazz trio resumed uncertainly. Plates were cleared. My dress suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. Tyler's mother, who had said exactly 9 words to me since the party began, approached quietly. She touched my elbow, her voice low. "He left, Grace," she said. "He said he can't go through with this." I blinked. My chest didn't rise. I waited for the denial, the panic, the heat of anger. But all I felt was stillness. She tried to say more, but I wasn't listening. Behind her, the floral arch sagged at one corner. One of the hydrangeas had wilted completely. The jazz faded. The staff began clearing champagne flutes as if on cue. No one came to me, not to console, not to explain. Everyone waited for someone else to speak first. I stood near the cake table, staring at the untouched slice meant for us to share. The silver knife still lay beside it. I picked up my glass cool and full in my hand and held it just beneath my chin. The bubbles stung my nose. The string lights above flickered, once, then steadied. The silence spread. I looked around the courtyard at the linen-draped tables, the empty chairs the band politely packing up. My dress brushed the floor as I stepped backward off the platform and onto the stone path leading to the valet. No one followed. No one stopped me. I didn't cry. Not then. I slipped off my heels one at a time and walked barefoot across the flagstones, the Arizona chill prickling at the soles of my feet. The desert air no longer smelled of jasmine, but ash and disbelief. The man I loved had vanished like a magician with poor timing. I didn't run, I evaporated. 3 hours after Tyler walked out on our engagement party, I was on a Greyhound headed east. No note, no call, no dramatic exit speech. Just one small suitcase, a passport I'd never used, and a ring box tucked into the side pocket like a bruise I wasn't ready to press. The bus smelled like cheap coffee and stranger's regret. I curled against the window, watching the Arizona desert stretch flat and golden as the sun came up. My dress was balled in my tote bag, my makeup half wiped my eyes dry from everything but sleep. The bus driver had a voice like sandpaper and called everyone kid, even the woman in her 60s knitting 2 rows behind me. "Where are you headed?" he asked during a rest stop in New Mexico. "New York," I murmured, staring into my styrofoam cup of diner coffee. "Leaving or arriving?" he asked not unkindly. "Both," I said. 3 days passed like fog. Texas was endless. In Tennessee, it rained sideways. I woke in Ohio with my forehead pressed against the glass and the taste of old pretzels in my mouth. At every stop, I thought about turning around. But the thought of facing Scottsdale again, facing Tyler's absence, the pity in my parents' eyes, kept me glued to my seat. By the time we rolled into the Port Authority station in Manhattan, my back ached and my mind was a blank page. I walked aimlessly through streets that pulsed with noise and smelled like wet concrete pepperoni, and something else I couldn't name. I didn't know a soul, and somehow that felt like protection. I found a women's hostel on Madison Street that charged by the week. The receptionist barely looked up as she slid me a clipboard and keycard. "Bunk 4C, she said. "Showers down the hall. Don't leave stuff unattended." The woman in the bunk below mine had bright pink hair and earbuds in all the time. She never asked my name, and I never asked hers. We existed in parallel silence. That night, I found a pawn shop 2 blocks over from the hostel. A bell tinkled overhead as I stepped in. The store smelled like old leather and lemon cleaner. Watches ticked softly in glass cases. Behind the counter stood a man in a cardigan with sleeves pushed to his elbows. He looked like someone's grandfather or a retired professor. "I'm not here to buy," I said, pulling the ring box from my coat. "I figured," he replied gently. I opened the lid and slid the engagement ring across the glass. He studied it beneath a loupe, then looked at me. "You sure?" I nodded. He named a price. It wasn't high, but it wasn't insulting either. He stepped into a back room and returned with a coat. Navy wool, a little frayed at the cuffs. Inside the collar embroidered in fading thread were the initials MH. He laid it across the counter. "Take it," he said. "Everyone starts somewhere." I don't remember thanking him, but I remember putting it on. The sleeves were long. It smelled like dust and cedar, and maybe, just maybe, beginning again. Back at the hostel, I bought 2 slices of dollar pizza and a plastic bottle of ginger ale from a bodega that smelled like cat litter. I ate them sitting cross-legged on my bunk. I didn't cry. I just stared at the wall. I spent the next week on autopilot, walked the same 5 blocks, sat in Washington Square Park pretending to read, looked for work on a phone with a cracked screen. I applied to wash dishes, clean offices, hand out flyers. No one called back. In the evenings, I started writing postcards. Not to anyone real. Just short messages addressed to no one like, "Today I chose silence over screaming," or "Still here, still standing." I dropped them into random mailboxes across the city. Let someone else read them and wonder. On the 7th day, I stood in a corner bodega, staring at a rack of prepaid phones. A burner. No name, no ties. I bought one in cash. Back in the hostel's lounge, I connected to the patchy Wi-Fi and booked a one-way flight to Paris. Used my middle name, changed 1 letter of my last paid, through a travel agency that asked no questions. The flight left in 3 days. Enough time to disappear again. I didn't pack much, just a few clothes, some documents, a photo of my parents on their wedding day. I tore up every postcard I hadn't mailed. The night before I left, I climbed up to the hostel's rooftop. The city glowed below like it didn't need anyone. I wore the coat from the pawn shop, even though it wasn't cold. The tag inside rubbed against the back of my neck. The initials weren't mine. The life I was leaving behind wasn't mine either, but I wore it anyway. It made me feel like someone else. Paris didn't welcome me. It tested me like an immune system fights off the unfamiliar. My arrival in late spring was soaked in gray skies and the sound of impatient horns. The hostel in Montmartre had no elevator and stairs that spiraled like a snail shell. I dragged my suitcase up 5 flights past doors that smelled of garlic perfume and cigarette ash. The room I'd rented was barely large enough for a single bed, a slanted desk, and a narrow window with chipped paint. But it was mine. Each morning, the air smelled like bakery butter and burnt espresso from the cafe downstairs. I learned quickly that UN Café meant a shot of bitterness in a tiny cup. No milk, no sugar, just heat and urgency. My job as a receptionist at Lambert Financial began on a Wednesday. I wore a borrowed blazer, applied mascara with a trembling hand, and practiced bonjour in the mirror. The building's entrance had brass fixtures that didn't match its peeling lobby walls. My desk sat near the glass door, a fortress between the outside world and something I didn't yet understand. Clients walked in one after another, speaking too quickly for my dictionary French to catch. I butchered names, fumbled phone extensions, and offered water that no one asked for. The phone rang endlessly. I answered once with hello instead of allo and earned a snort from a man in a trench coat. Claire Dubois, my direct supervisor, was elegance with razor edges. She wore pencil skirts, red lipstick, and a gaze that made you want to apologize for existing. Devereaux, she said, correcting my pronunciation of the CEO's name, Louis Devereaux. Not Devereux, French, not Texan. I'm trying, I mumbled. Try quieter, she replied and walked off. At lunch, she disappeared with the rest of the office. I ate a ham and butter sandwich from the corner bakery, sitting alone on a bench outside. The pigeons were friendlier than my coworkers. That night in my room, I opened a small black notebook I'd bought from a stall near the Seine. On the cover in gold foil, it read, "The me I'm becoming." I wrote down the few words I'd learned that day. Bonjour, merci, désolé, eau water, échec failure. I added that last one myself. At 2 a.m., I woke to sirens and the hum of the city. My room was warm. I opened the window. Somewhere below, a woman laughed a full-bodied, wine-fueled sound that made me ache. I scribbled again in the notebook, I don't want to be invisible anymore. The next week, I began staying late. I didn't have friends to meet or places to go. I tidied the front area, filed incoming invoices, made copies for Claire. One night, while sorting documents, I noticed something odd. 2 identical invoices from the same client marked as paid. Same amount, same services, same date. I stared at them for 10 minutes, unsure if I was imagining things. The next morning, I took them to the accounting office. A man in wire-rimmed glasses squinted at the paperwork and muttered, "Mon Dieu." He thanked me without looking up. That afternoon, my desk phone rang. "Mr. Devereaux would like to see you," said Claire flatly. My stomach dropped. Louis Devereaux's office was cold white and smelled faintly of leather and paper. He sat behind a desk that could seat 6. His eyes were gray, calculating. "You noticed a duplicated invoice," he said without preamble. "Yes, sir. You are new. And yet you saw what 4 others missed." I didn't know how to respond. I just nodded. "You were not hired for analysis," he continued, "but I'd like to offer you a trial position. Administrative assistant. Temporary." My throat tightened. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded once and returned to his screen. I took that as dismissal and walked out pulse-hammering. Claire didn't say anything that day, but when I passed her desk, she slid me a folded note without looking up. Inside it read, "You're learning faster than you think." That night, back in my room, I added new words to my notebook. Compétence, competence, confiance, confidence, capable, calme. Ici, here I circled the last 3. Then I wrote a sentence I wasn't sure I believed yet, but hoped I could grow into capable. Calm. Here. The lamp on my desk flickered as the city hummed beneath my window. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel strong. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lost. Paris hadn't saved me. But maybe it was teaching me how to save myself. Nathan Cole didn't ask what I'd run from. He asked what I'd noticed that others missed. It was mid-July, and Paris had melted into that sleepy rhythm where time blurred around air conditioners, sidewalk cafes, and clinking glasses of iced Perrier. At Lambert Financial, the mood was anything but slow. A VIP client was flying in an American shipping magnate named Nathan Cole, head of Atlantic Meridian. I was called in by Claire, who handed me a stack of reports without looking up. "Organize these," she said. "Devereaux wants them tight and idiot-proof." "Yes, ma'am," I muttered. "Don't call me ma'am," she snapped. The night before the meeting, I stayed late. I spread everything out across my tiny desk: market data, logistics analysis, risk reports. I highlighted discrepancies, flagged a few numbers that didn't track, just in case. The office lights dimmed around 10 p.m., and soft piano music drifted from someone's office down the hall. I sipped lukewarm espresso and rechecked line items until my eyes blurred. The next morning, I stepped into the elevator arms full of freshly bound packets. As the doors started to close, a hand reached in strong sure, and the elevator jerked to a stop. Nathan Cole stepped in. Tall, polished, quiet. He nodded once in greeting. I nodded back, then promptly dropped half the reports. Papers scattered across the floor like leaves in wind. "Allow me," he said, kneeling before I could. His hands were steady as he gathered the documents. I noticed his cufflinks brushed steel minimalist. No logo, no flash. "I thank you," I stammered. Cheeks flushed. He handed me the last packet. "Good data deserves better treatment." The elevator opened. I followed him silently into the boardroom. Louis Devereaux introduced us. "Mr. Cole, this is Grace Martin, our administrative analyst." Nathan glanced at me. "The one who dropped the reports?" I smiled faintly. "All part of the charm." He sat, expression unreadable. "Let's begin." The meeting moved quickly. Too quickly. The Atlantic Meridian team presented an aggressive investment strategy targeting Baltic shipping routes. Something about it itched at the back of my mind. I flipped through the reports, found the market trends I'd flagged. Fuel costs, labor disputes, and unstable port authority. "Excuse me," I said, voice barely above the hum of the AC. All heads turned. Louis raised an eyebrow. Claire froze. "This strategy," I continued, "assumes stable fuel prices and uninterrupted port access in Estonia and Lithuania. But there have been 3 strikes in the past quarter, and a 4th is projected." The room went still. Nathan leaned back slightly, considering me. "Are you saying we'd be entering a volatile corridor?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "Short-term profits could be wiped by long-term instability." He studied me. "What do you recommend diversify through Scandinavian routes?" I said. "Higher initial cost, but fewer variables. Safer, steadier return." Louis looked like he might combust. Claire stared at the table. Nathan, however, nodded slowly. Noted. The meeting adjourned without further confrontation. As I gathered my things, I felt a bead of sweat run down my spine. I returned to my desk, certain I'd overstepped, certain I'd be pulled aside and reprimanded or dismissed entirely. The rest of the day crawled. No emails, no messages. I stayed past 6, pretending to organize documents I'd already filed twice. Just after 7, Claire approached with an envelope. "From Devereaux's office," she said. Her voice was tight, but not unfriendly. Inside was a handwritten note. "You just saved us 6 months of recovery." Ends below it, 1 line in block letters. "Confidential assign Grace Martin to Project Orion." I stared at it. My hands trembled. The next morning, a new briefing folder sat on my desk. My name was typed on the cover. Not handwritten, not scribbled in ink. Printed like I belonged there. From that day on, Nathan Cole began asking for me by name. At first, I was just in the room, quiet note-taking, invisible but present. Then came questions. Then came trust. He never flattered, never indulged, but he always listened. During a coffee break one Thursday, we stood by the espresso machine, both too tired for small talk. "What are you reading?" he asked, looking at the book poking from my bag. I held it up, The Art of War in French. He nodded. Practical. Dense. You annotate I try, I said, but half the time I think I'm underlining what I want it to say. He smiled, just barely. That's where the learning happens. We began exchanging titles. Once a week, he'd leave a book on my desk, no note. I did the same. He preferred biographies. I leaned toward quiet fiction. Somehow it balanced. There was no flirtation, only gravity. The kind that pulled slowly, invisibly, until you realized you'd been drawn into someone's orbit all along. He once passed me a report I'd missed during a late meeting. Didn't say a word, just found the page, slid it in front of me, and tapped once before moving on. I never forgot that. The way he stood when I entered a room, the way he said grace like it wasn't just a name. One evening, while reviewing quarterly shifts in maritime tariffs, I flagged a clause buried in the fine print, a regulatory change that would have cost Atlantic Meridian millions. Nathan read it silently, then said softly, "You just saved us 6 months of recovery." He didn't smile, but he didn't need to. That night, I walked home through Paris streets humming with summer. My shoes clicked against the cobblestone like punctuation. For the first time since I'd left Arizona, I felt whole. Not fixed, not new, but finally seen. And in the morning, my name was on the project briefing folder again. Not as assistant, as lead. I didn't plan to see Tyler again, but when you build value, it turns out people start needing you. It was a Thursday morning when Nathan forwarded me a pitch deck. No subject line, just a PDF with the heading Reynolds Construction, Expansion Proposal. I froze. The name hit like a cold wind. I opened the file with steady fingers, but my breath had already shortened. There it was. Tyler's company. His father's, really. A business I'd once been expected to join help fund support through marriage. Now they were bleeding cash and selling opportunity to stay afloat. I knocked on Nathan's office door. "Come in," he said, not looking up from his laptop. "I'd like to sit in on the Reynolds meeting," I said. He paused. "You know them?" I nodded once. "I used to." He didn't press. That was one of Nathan's many strengths. He respected boundaries like they were assets. He just leaned back slightly and said, "Then you lead it." I spent the weekend combing through their materials. The projections were bloated. Claims of secured European contracts had no signatures, no terms. Debt ratios hidden behind vague language. It looked polished until you held it up to the light. Monday came with overcast skies and a boardroom that smelled faintly of citrus polish and new leather. Atlantic Meridian's 44th floor conference room overlooked Park Avenue like a throne over a chessboard. The table was marble, the air electric. Nathan sat at the head, calm as ever. I took my place beside him, my notes precise, my hands still. Claire was across the room with her tablet. The Atlantic team filled the remaining chairs, murmuring quietly as the door opened. Marcus Klein entered first. Crisp suit, nervous smile. Then Tyler walked in. For a moment he didn't see me. His eyes scanned the room, assessing. His face had changed, more lines, less color. He looked like a man trying too hard to seem taller. Then I said, "Mr. Grant." His gaze snapped to me. He blinked. Once, twice. "Grace," he said, voice catching. "Ms. Martin," I corrected evenly. "Let's begin." Marcus launched into the pitch growth potential overseas contracts diversification strategy. Tyler didn't speak for the first 5 minutes. He kept glancing at me as if waiting for the punchline. I let them talk. When Marcus finished, I slid the due diligence summary across the table. Your projections assume a 12% annual growth based on unconfirmed European contracts, I began. Our review found no executed agreements. Additionally, your outstanding liabilities exceed your liquid assets by 38%. That raises material concerns. Marcus cleared his throat. The deals are close to final. We don't invest in closeness, I replied not unkindly. We invest in facts. Tyler leaned forward. You just disappeared, he said suddenly. You broke everything. My mother thought you'd died. Nathan's expression didn't change. No reaction, no interruption. I turned to Tyler. I didn't disappear. I removed myself from something that wasn't mine anymore. And then I rebuilt. You could have said something. You could have... You said enough for both of us, I said. I heard you remember that night on the patio when you planned to humiliate me into submission. He opened his mouth, closed it. I continued. This proposal is incomplete, unsupported, and risky. We decline participation. The room was silent except for the hum of the city far below. Tyler sat back deflated. Marcus gathered his papers, eyes avoiding mine. As they stood to leave, Tyler hesitated. You look different. I smiled just slightly. So do you. They walked out. I closed the file folder in front of me and turned to Nathan. Next item, I asked. Bye. He didn't look at me right away. He glanced at the empty seat Tyler had occupied, then nodded. Next item, he said. After the meeting, I returned to my office. My hands were steady, my pulse even. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, like closing a door that had long been left ajar. That evening, I stood at the glass window outside the elevator bank. The skyline blinked back at me. I thought of that night in Arizona, barefoot, humiliated, unsure. I thought of dollar pizza stolen French words the coat marked MH I'd rebuilt. Not louder, not harder, just quieter, stronger. Tyler never looked back. Neither did I. The yacht didn't make me feel rich. It made me feel real. It was summer on the Amalfi Coast, the kind of blue morning that seemed to stretch forever. Salt crusted the edges of my coffee mug as I leaned on the polished rail of the Orem barefoot, the teak deck cool beneath my soles. The wind smelled like lemon blossoms and sea. Behind me, the yacht's quiet hum blended into the silence of being far, far away from everything that used to weigh me down. I wasn't hiding. I was choosing. Nathan was still asleep. We'd gotten into the habit of early nights and quiet mornings, our rhythms rarely rushed, never forced. Most of our conversations didn't need full sentences anymore. Sometimes he'd just glance up from a file and say, and I'd nod, knowing exactly what he meant. Other times, we'd argue over croissants in the Paris kitchen, about the long-term yield curves in Eastern Europe, and end the discussion with a kiss and shared laughter. I ran strategic analysis for his ventures now. Not as a favor, not because I had to, because I was good at it. We split our time between Paris and New York, kept separate offices, but shared one vision. A few months back, Claire sent a letter. Not an email, a handwritten note in her meticulous cursive. She'd taken over a mentorship program for girls in Lyon and asked if I'd consider joining the advisory board. Her note ended with, "Some rooms are quiet because the people inside already know who they are. I think you've become one of them." I said yes. The week after, Nathan asked me to walk with him down to the cliffs in Ez. No speech, no velvet box, just the two of us standing over the sea. He held out a gold band shaped like a wave. Not flashy, not traditional, just right. He didn't ask for a promise. He asked if I'd keep walking forward with him. We married in a civil office in Paris. 2 witnesses, one afternoon. The clerk wore a polka dot tie. I wore navy. We signed the papers, exchanged rings, and went out for pastries afterward. No bouquet, no speeches, no ghost of Tyler in the background. There were no announcements, no Facebook photos, just a quiet merging of 2 lives already halfway there. The yacht wasn't a reward. It was a vessel for stillness, a place where I could sit on the deck at sunrise with my notebook, the same one I'd bought near the Seine years ago. The me I'm becoming. The pages were soft, now worn at the edges, filled with words in 2 languages, some crossed out, some circled. This morning, I added only 1 sentence to the final page, "I am her now." I closed the notebook and rested it on the railing beside my mug. A pelican glided across the water like it had somewhere more important to be. I smiled. Behind me, Nathan stirred. I could hear him in the galley glass clinking the soft pad of bare feet on wood. He was probably making tea or trying not to burn toast. I let him have his moment. I'd built a life where I wasn't chasing peace, it simply waited for me. The coat from Harlan, the one with MH stitched inside, was folded in my closet back in Paris. I'd kept it all these years, not out of sentiment, but out of honor.